Yeah. Okay, the webinar is now streaming, so we'll just wait for Councilor Ludwig to return. I'm trying a new location in my house. I've set up my office briefly. Anything, Councilor Ludwig? No, okay. I will then call the meeting of the Committee of the Whole together for June 1, 2021, being held on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. We're all faced with knowledge of history and a recent past tragedy in Kamloops at the school in Kamloops. And to start this meeting, I'd like to carry on with some of what we did yesterday. Councillor Kroll and myself and a couple members of staff attended the ceremony in Seashalt with the remembrance again of the 215 children whose grave sites have been identified. And I'd like to start this meeting off, as well as the meeting this evening, with a moment of silence in memory of those children. And because the number of 215, we're going to do 2 minutes and 15 seconds. So I'd just like everybody to give some thought, contemplate that for that length of time. And you'll see how long that just feels like, and how important the lives of those 215 children was. So we'll start now. Thank you. Thank you, council, staff, members of the public. 215 lives is a lot of lives, and we need to remember that. So we will have another moment to remember this evening at the beginning of the council meeting. So I will now call this council meeting to order, the time being 3:05 p.m., and ask for approval of the agenda. Councillor Kroll, thank you. Councillor Ludwig seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much. Motion also to receive all of the reports that are on the agenda today. Councillor Deandre, Councillor moved, Councillor Ludwig second. All in favor? Thank you very much. We have a very full agenda. We're looking at 133 pages of full agenda. So we'll launch right into that. And thank you, members of the public, for your presence, and ask you to be patient with us as we go through the agenda. There will be an opportunity at the end of this meeting for inquiries. So we'll start off then with a development permit for form and character for 1028 1042 Gibsons Way and Katie Thomas.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. I'll share my screen. Oh. Are you seeing my screen or are you seeing my notes?
I can see your screen and there are notes on the side. Yeah.
There we go. There we go. Okay, so the town of Gibsons has received an application for a development permit for form and character for a new car dealership at the site of Haley Dodge, which is 1028 and 1042 Gibsons Way. Now, the purpose of discussing this item today is to review the proposed new building in relation to development permit area number 3 guidelines and to consider the authorization of the development permit. So this is a quick slide to show you where we are in the application process. So the application has been referred to the internal and external agencies as well as to the advisory design panel. So the staff report on pages 5 and 37 to 37 of your agenda package contains the design guideline review, the referral comments and the recommendations from the ADP, as well as the full application package of drawings and landscape plans. So the property covers 3 lots and is currently being consolidated into 1 lot. As you can see, we've got 2 buildings on the property. It's a dealership with servicing and a car detailing area over here. Now the dealership sells both new and pre-owned vehicles, including electric vehicles, recreational vehicles, and tiny homes. Now, once the property is consolidated, it will have split zoning. So C1 allows for general retail and office use. C3, which are these 2 lots here, allows for automotive repair and servicing within a building, as well as the sale of new and used vehicles, recreational vehicles, and manufactured homes. So the proposed uses conform with the zoning bylaw. Now, the applicant proposes to demolish the existing building, which you can see in the dotted lines here, and replace with 1 large building, which will serve as a car dealership and service center. So in the C1 area, you'll see that you'll have the sales showroom and the retail sales. And in the C3 zones, that's where the car service and auto detail will be, as per the zoning. Now the applicant proposes to demolish everything, rebuild, and we've noted that because there's differing zones with C1 and C3, there's a difference between the setbacks on the front lot line. So this is Gibsons Way right here, and you've got Cement Way that comes along the east side, and then you've got Cement Way on the back side, on the north side. So there's a 0 lot line at Gibsons Way for C1 and a 6-meter setback for C3. So you can see that the building goes back and pushes back for the C3 zone. So this is the Gibsons Way elevation of the new proposed building. So the Jeep, Ram, Dodge, Chrysler, Canada's new corporate identity, consolidates the standards of the 4 brands. Attachment C in the staff report provides the corporate standards. Essentially, wood is the standard for Jeep. Steel gray is for Ram, red for Dodge, and chrome for Chrysler, as well as the chrome metal arch with grid windows, which reflects the Chrysler building in New York. So the proposed building looks to merge these corporate standards with the development permit area number 3 guidelines to provide an appropriate dealership within a town of Gibsons context. Now, the guidelines request that the building should be sited with the entrance to the building facing the street to encourage the creation of interest and access for pedestrians. So as you can see in this image, the main pedestrian access is from Gibsons Way with these steps up from the sidewalk. And then you've got the archway that they have to add for the corporate standard. This is an elevation showing Gibsons Way on the bottom of your screen, Seamount Way comes around on the side and to the back. So as you can see, all of the driveways are at the rear of the property as per the DPA guidelines. Now there are two main driveways for customers. You've got the customer parking, and then you've got the like the defined car service area. Now this is to be a private driveway that's not meant for visitors, and they're hoping to make this a smaller, less significant driveway, and it's for when the vehicles come off of the truck and are parked in front for the car sales display. Now, the applicant's been really careful to ensure that they've got adequate on-site parking, because currently the existing site doesn't have adequate parking, and so there's a number of parked cars along the boulevard on Seamount Way, and that creates clutter and it's quite unattractive. So this cleans up the site. Now this image also provides a bit of clarity on the roof modulation, so you can see that there's a number of different roof heights, and that's as per the design guidelines to make sure that it's not just one story or one block, but to show that there's a variety in the massing. This image shows that they've used elements of West Coast design. They've got wood features, and they've also used this sheltered deck space. So you've got a deck above and sheltered underneath for employees and for visitors to check out the vehicles. Now, the architect had originally proposed that these are the service bays that you will see from Gibsons Way, and these are these shutters, these blue shutters will go up, and these wood slats would remain, and they're to provide secure ventilation. Now they were proposed to be metal at first, but after discussions with the advisory design panel, they've changed them to a wood effect material so that they incorporate some more wood elements in the building. This image shows the rear of the building from Seamount Way, and this is where the customer parking is, and there's an accessible walkway from the road to the motor part sales area. Now there are several windows on this frontage which create an active street front, which is a great improvement from what we have existing. And this is another image of the rear showing the defined area for servicing. So you've got your service bays where you'll drive into, and then you've got fencing as well for screening. This image is the front of the building on Gibsons Way. And now the guidelines speak to encouraging varied building forms, modulating the roof lines and walls, as well as limiting any blank walls. So the proposal conforms to all of these guidelines. In terms of the landscaping plan, they've updated their initial landscaping plan with an extensive planting scheme here. So they've updated the existing grassy verge on the Gibsons Way frontage, which is right here, and they've created a landscaped area that's broken up with a number of boulders, which creates a West Coast feel. And they can also see this image here is the corner here where they've created kind of a vehicle 4x4 presentation center with landscaping. Now the main idea for the landscape plan is to try and retain visibility to the lot for the vehicles, because this is a dealership after all. And so that when you're walking down Gibsons Way on the sidewalk, you should be able to see some vehicles without too much screening. Now, it should also be noted that this property is in a unique situation in that there are 3 frontages. I don't think there might be one other property in town that has this the same kind of issue, but this means that the applicant is required to install frontage improvements along all 3 sides, and the frontage works are all determined by the subdivision and development bylaw. So it'll include like sidewalks, street trees, repaving to the center of the line of the road, etc. Now, the current zoning permits the automobile sales use, and therefore there are some compromises to the development permit design guidelines to allow for the use. Several of the design guidelines aren't applicable to this particular land use, and this is due in part to the fact that the official community plan has been updated more recently to the zoning bylaw, and it now doesn't envision auto sales along the Gibsons Way street frontage, whereas previous versions used to. So staff conclude that the proposed new building and the extensive landscaping improves the existing site considerably and provides a stronger pedestrian experience. However, there is a compromise to the lack of definition at the Gibsons Way, Seamount Way corner. Staff also suggests that the removal of the vehicles on the boulevard on Seamount Way and the addition of the landscaping, frontage works, and of course the new building with its active facades will create a gateway to the town's industrial area on Seamount Way. The applications were referred to the following departments and agencies. The ADP recommended approval subject to the submission of an improved landscape plan, incorporating more wood design features and a visual for landscaping for council's consideration. The applicant has updated the landscape plan and provided visuals as shown in this presentation, as well as attached to the staff report. And they've also incorporated more wood elements to the service phase. So the recommendations are listed on page 1 of this report and shown right here. So staff recommend authorizing the DP subject to the submission of an updated site plan showing the reconfiguration of driveways to meet the town standards, and to show details of the refuse area with their screening. Now, Scott Davis is the architect, and he is available for questions. He should be, oh yeah, he's right here now, so he can answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie. It quite a significant change at that location. Well, I'm sure we'll have a conversation about it. So I'll open it to council for discussion. And welcome, Scott. Councilor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. I certainly appreciate the attention that's been placed with respect to the landscaping, which was a little on the shy side when it came to the Development Planning Committee. You know, I appreciate it's really difficult when you're dealing with a corporate image to, you know, the corporation wants a uniform look right across the country, and then it's trying to fit into, you know, a small community, and it's a challenge. So I appreciate, you know, what you've done to try and step the buildings, vary the setbacks, and incorporate, you know, the West Coast materials, and extending that into the landscaping. You know, the client is, you know, I think a valuable partner in the community. I took the opportunity to talk to some of the other businesses in the community, Gibson's Fasteners, Kenmac Auto Parts, and even, you know, the coffee shops and the other car service depots in the area. And the client is a valuable partner in the community. I believe they employ close to 30 people. So I think it's a vast improvement over what's currently there. And I think it's going to be a huge improvement, the fact with the improvements being done on the three streets. So, you know, it's a huge improvement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilor Ludwig.
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Kroll. I like it too. I think it looks good. I mean, the one thing, if I was going to ask for anything, it might be that a little bit more greenery, even in addition to what has already been presented, would have been nice, perhaps. I liked South Coast Ford when they redid their building, they put some, I don't know what that material, what that is, but it's like, it's a wire facade that they put on the side of their building that, you know, clematis or whatnot can grow up. And I think that really softens the commercial look of things at times. Maybe a few additional flower boxes or, you know, trees and planters around might soften it a little bit, but it is a car dealership. That's what they do. And I think it's a big improvement, and I like the look of it. So,
Councilor Deandre.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I share the same opinion as the other councilors. I think for a corporate project, it looks great. And the beautification through the landscape is also a great thing. I would like just to bring some hard facts that must be considered about this rezoning. So the first one is we are rezoning one of the lots from C.
It's not a rezoning. It's not a rezoning.
Oh, we are not rezoning.
Existing.
So why did I? Okay, so why did I think was rezoning?
No.
So what is it exactly? Well, when you incorporate, you are amalgamating the lots, right?
Amalgamating lots, but not rezoning. Yeah.
Okay, but nevertheless, there's one lot that is designated as C1 and it will become C3. Am I correct?
No, stays C1. I'm gonna put that back up, Katie,
Okay.
Yeah, I would you like me to share my screen again?
please. Yeah. So the C1 lot remains C1, and the development on that lot is consistent with the C1 zone, and the C3 lots will remain C3 and gain development consistent with the setbacks and requirements of a C3 zone.
Okay, Mayor. So that's to say in the future, if there's a willingness of building some residence on top of the business, everything remains the same. Am I correct? Because that's what C1 permits.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Oh, because C1 permits like a residence on the second floor.
Mm-hmm.
And so since the designation of the lot's not change in the future, if even the owner wants to do for whatever reason, it's still possible because it's still classified as C1.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so so this is one aspect. I was just going to talk about residential loss, but that's not going to happen. I think the biggest impact regards greenhouse gases. This project will likely increase the sales of larger cars. According to Christopher Kennedy, which is an engineering professor at the University of Victoria and an expert in carbon accounting and inventories, transportation has been one of the fastest growing sectors of greenhouse gases emissions, which are pushing the world into a climate crisis. And obviously cars fall into that category. So if you include light duty vehicles and light duty trucks, so cars, pickups, SUVs, and smaller vans, they account for nearly half of the greenhouse gases emissions from transportation in Canada. Heavy duty vehicles, like such as larger pickups, trucks, they account for 35%. So right now in Canada, light trucks now account for nearly 3 of every 4 new vehicles sold in Canada. This data is from the Des Rosier Automotive Consultants. So the overall is there will be a lot of greenhouse gas emissions over a long period of time from this business. Another interesting aspect, last week I attended AVIC, which is the Association of Vancouver Islands and Coastal Communities. And I heard clearly and loud from youth representatives that youth wants systemic change to address the climate crisis, not only recognition of the crisis. They want us politicians to address the root of the problem and to live in practice, and they want active transportation. So Council also has on their strategic plan one of the core objectives to respond to the changing climate, that we will seek opportunities to mitigate the impacts of a changing climate and reduce the greenhouse emissions. And also, excuse me, to be accountable to youth and the next generations. So what I would like to propose is that a community amenity contribution to partially offset the greenhouse gases produced by this facility over the years is conditioning to the approval of this development. And I thought the community amenity contribution could be for eelgrass restoration, nature rehabilitation, or even active transportation. I think this is fair. I know the town doesn't have tradition of asking developers this kind of, industrial and business, but I think, you know, we are in a crisis. We are inviting youth to come to council and speak what their concerns are. And I think it's our obligation to act. And I'm sure the developer will be sympathetic to this cause. So I would like, if this is possible, and also to ask the developer if there's a possibility of having permeable asphalt, which is more environmental friendly. It emits less greenhouse gases on the making.
Thank you very much. Katie, you let yourself up.
I was just listening to Councillor Deandre and the idea of community amenity contributions. Now, because this is just a form and character development permit, we're just looking at the form and massing and the design of the building. It's not a rezoning, and so CACs aren't triggered for this type of application. So I just wanted to clear that up.
Thank you very much. The owner is not present with us, but if he does not do this work, I have two questions. If the owner were here, one, if they did not do this work, would they sell any fewer vehicles? And number two, does Dodge, Jeep, and all these dealerships have electric vehicles? Who can answer? Yeah.
I can speak to that if you would like.
Thank you, Scott, please.
Yes, thank you for having me at your meeting. Scott Davis here. I do actually understand from Todd McDonald and Joe Haley about this dealership, and the current building is actually inefficient and needs a lot of upgrades. That's why I first met them. And the cost of upgrading that building to bring it up to current standards for the types of things you're thinking about was too expensive. And this dealership needs to improve, or else it's going. Chrysler Canada will not hold it any longer with the look that it had from Skookum Dodge. All right. So the business is looking at a very expensive change, and these employees would have no other place to go on the coast. There would be only 2 major dealers left on the coast. So if this business was to leave, the cars are actually going to be sold out of the Vancouver Lower Mainland, still coming to the coast, but would have fewer places to service on the coast, thus would have to travel further. We're looking at Mr. McDonald, Todd McDonald, and Joe Haley have told me that the industry is changing very quickly to electric. They really are worried that they're not going to be able to service cars when they're electric. They really would like to service gas vehicles because there's a lot more parts to replace. So they don't know how long they're going to be able to make money servicing vehicles, but that is really where the money is. Car sales themselves are really, really not the biggest part of making the money here. So that's why the large change to selling parts, because the Mopar brand has high quality parts, and would add one more retail in car parts sales here in the town of Gibsons. We see that car parts is moving to Sechelt and the First Nations. So the town of Gibsons would have a really high quality parts sales here. So the service and the sales is where the employees are, And the salesmen, of course, which everybody thinks are car dealers, they're really looking at electric vehicles because more people are coming in asking for hybrids or electric. If you look at that roof on that design, the whole intention of that roof is to one day have solar panels. And the permeable asphalt is something we really are looking at. We would like to change the surface of the material. Right now, we can't do much because it's old asphalt. So I hope that helps you understand the commitment of this dealership to this property, to this town is very intense, very high. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kroll?
You know, I appreciate what Councillor Deandre is saying, and it's really, you know, it's a challenge today with, you know, climate on one side and fossil fuel vehicles on the other. But something I've noticed just personally is the commitment of the dealership to deal electric where they can. They're dealing with, they're selling Teslas, they're selling Leafs, they're selling Bolts. Admittedly, they're not a new car dealership because it's not available within their line. Like I can't imagine an electric Jeep somehow, but certainly within the other Chrysler line, they're moving towards electric. And I think it behooves us to have a dealership in the community that sells electric vehicles. You know, I would hate to see 30 jobs lost in this community in this current climate. And, you know, just speaking to the businesses, KenMac, applaud the dealership as a great neighbor. They deal a lot with them. Gibsons Fasteners, when I spoke to them, they're not the biggest because they have their own parts department, but, you know, if there's an oddball thing they need, they're dealing with the local businesses, even the coffee shops. And the spin-off, I talked to Park Road Automotive because a lot of people deal with the dealership when it's within warranty. But a lot of times when the warranty expires, they go to secondary service businesses. So Park Road does a lot of servicing for Chrysler products, you know, once they're out of warranty. So, you know, it's sort of a win-win, and I appreciate the effort that they're moving towards with electric vehicles. And certainly the landscape and the tree enhancements that have been incorporated into this revised landscape plan is a huge plus over what was initially presented to us. So, you know, I would certainly be willing to move the motion as presented by staff.
And I'm just going to go to Katie. Katie, is the motion different than it is on the agenda report? I saw your on your presentation, it was slightly different.
No, it should be the same.
You didn't have the reference to the reconfiguration of driveways, I don't think, on your.
I did. It was the first one. So the referral comment from infrastructure services was asking that we make sure that the driveways meet the subdivision and development standard. So the recommendation is that we authorize the development permit subject to receiving a new site plan showing the updated driveways.
And the details of screening?
And the details of the refuse area screening, yes.
Okay, good, okay.
Okay.
Is that seconded? Anyone who chooses to second? Councillor Ludwig, you're seconding? Okay, thank you. Speaking to the motion myself, I'm strongly in favor of this. I think, I mean, if you look at the overview, it's very consistent with the development up there. This will be a tremendous improvement to that corner, to that site along there. And I think that we get rid of one temporary building up there, so that I think that's an excellent way to go. So I thank you, Scott, for your design, and it is a car dealership. The only thing I would look at, and I'm looking at the drawings that actually show the building itself, and the one that I see labeled Sun Deck image on page 6 of Innovative Design. I would think some planters around that porch entranceway and stuff like that would make a nice addition, just to soften that. But I think that's probably something that would happen without my recommendations. So, yeah. So, Councilor Deandre.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just a clarification. I support the business. I understand I'm not dwelling on this part. I think what I'm emphasizing is it is a business that has an impact on climate change. And I understand the change, the extent that the owner is going, but I think it's also important that these things are incorporated, because we have to decrease emissions. And even though he will be selling electric cars, a hard fact is for 4 cars sold, 3 are bigger cars, and they put way more. The statistics is sometimes it's almost double than a smaller car, and obviously electric vehicle. So I think it is. I would like I understand all the beautification and that the owner is doing. He has to do regardless on sidewalks and things, but I would like this to be considered, because we have youth coming to us and asking us, please do something about it. And I think it's important. He's a member of the community, and perhaps it's just an extra stretch, but it could be feasible. So I would like still to consider some contribution in this regard, because the bottom line is there are impacts that it's the next generation that will be suffering.
Councilor Ludwig?
I appreciate Councilor Deandre's concern, and I understand where she's coming from, and the fact that this type of industry does emit fossil fuels and contributes to it and that sort of thing. I just don't feel that a form and character permit is the time or place to be asking for this type of community amenity contribution. If we as a municipality, and I don't even know if this is possible, but if we wanted to incorporate certain commercial activities requiring community amenity contributions, then we should be looking at including that in our community amenity contributions bylaw, and not necessarily as a one-off to individual projects. And I feel at this point, I don't feel it's fair or appropriate to be putting that on this particular applicant without him knowing before he applied that this would be an added expense or burden on him that he perhaps hadn't planned for. So I do appreciate what you're saying, and that is forward-thinking thought that we should think about. But in this particular case, I feel like those policies aren't in place right now, and that's not the understanding that he applied under.
Councilor Kroll, do you have anything to add, or you want to call the question?
Well, there's something I would like to add is, and I'm putting on another hat for a moment from the charities I've worked on, and the client has been an incredibly strong supporter of things outside the business, supporting local teams, supporting local charities, supporting this. I believe they're one of the supporters of the Sontag Marine Facility. They've supported Marine Search and Rescue on several accounts. They've supported Landsar. They're doing a lot in the community to help offset, some of the aspects of the product they're selling. And it's because of the product they're selling that they're able to help these other areas. So I would ask that the question that we call the question.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to be careful that we don't start voting on projects as to relative to how much somebody donates to this project or that project. I think we got to be very careful about that. I think that this is a business case. It meets our requirements. I think that's an enhancement to the community. It's going to support ongoing jobs and perhaps even create more jobs. And I think we want to focus on those issues relative to that. We will be talking about the community amenity policy shortly. If there's room to increase the requirements for community amenities, we can look at that. But right now, it does not exist. And I thank the architect. I thank the proponent. And I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, thank you. And thank you, Scott Davis, that your proposal has made it through another hurdle. Okay. Thank you very much. Hopefully, what's the timing on this, Scott?
We're just bringing together all our consultants, our engineers. We're trying to keep as much local as we can using local professionals. So We're working as fast as we can, but as you know, in this town, in this area, everybody's very busy. Right. So it's in the dealership cannot wait much longer. They have to keep going. So it'll be as fast as we can move through. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you, Katie, for your report. Okay, we'll move on to the agenda now to the new community amenity contributions policy and the Director of Planning and Urban Systems. And into your agenda, this is pages 39 to 133. Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. So this item on the agenda presents a report completed by Urban Systems on the recommended community amenity contribution policy approaches, and it provides an updated CAC policy with recommended rates, which are based on a financial analysis completed for the town of Gibsons. We have two presenters from Urban Systems. Justin Bear, he is a registered professional planner and the lead for land economics. And Samantha Leahy is also a registered professional planner and a community planner with Urban Systems. They are both available to present their reports, the findings, and how they got to the numbers that are proposed in the CAC policy. There are some decisions Council will need to make in terms of how to split up the CAC funds received. In this report, staff are recommending replacing the existing policy with the new policy. So I'll pass it over to Justin and Samantha to present their report and policy, and they have a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation to share.
Thank you, and welcome Justin and Samantha. We'll look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Now let's see if I can get technology to cooperate. So please stand by for one moment. And let me know when you can see my screen.
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. Share.
There it is, coming up.
There it is.
Your notes as well.
All right, give me a second. Let's see if I can swap this out. Can you see the notes or the?
Well, the main slides are
one.
small, so if we can make it bigger, that'd be great. Now,
We see your notes page.
Sorry. Ay.
Justin, this is Rebecca Anderson, the corporate officer. Would you like me
Hi.
to share my screen?
Do you have the most recent PowerPoint?
I have one dated May 18th.
Okay. I mean, there's no real difference anyway. So yes, if you could just do that, that would be much appreciated. Perfect. Thank you very much. All right, so apologies for technology. I look forward to when we can do these things in person again. So thanks very much for having us. And thank you, Leslie Ann. So again, my name is Justin Bear. I'm one of the leads of the land economics practice at Urban Systems. And I have Samantha Leahy with us today. So she's a community planner with Urban Systems. We're both out of the Vancouver and Surrey offices, but currently mostly out of our home offices. So our presentation today is designed to very briefly walk you through the two phases of work that we've undertaken. And if we could get the next slide, please. The two phases of work we've undertaken for you since the early part of 2020 on the topic of community amenity contributions, which is now culminating in the proposed policy that we have before you today. So we'll do a brief recap to remind everyone what are CACs, and then we'll do a quick walkthrough of the two phases of work that we undertook, and then we'll present the proposed CAC policy. So next slide, and I'll turn it over to Samantha for a bit.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Thanks for having us today. And like Justin said, we look forward to when we can do these in person again. So I'm going to quickly go over what CACs are. So as communities grow, so do the demand for community amenities such as affordable housing, trails, public art, and plazas. These amenities cannot be financed through DCCs. Density bonusing or community amenity contributions are tools available to local governments to secure public amenities. There are generally two philosophies around securing amenity contributions. First is the basket of goods approach, which is similar to DCCs. So community amenities needed are identified, priced out, and then a financial analysis determines rates based on the anticipated growth. The second philosophy is the value capture or ability to pay approach. And this is based on contributions as a proportion of the lift in land value that is achieved through the rezoning. And Justin will get into some of the nitty gritty of that in a couple slides. Typically, CACs are applied at rezoning, and density bonusing can be applied at rezoning or embedded in a zone. Different rates may be established for different land uses or different growth areas. Next slide, please. So what is the difference between density bonusing and CACs? So both density bonusing and CACs permit developers to build additional floor space in exchange for community amenities. Density bonusing is explicitly legislated under the Local Government Act, which provides a framework for implementation. Typically, density bonusing is incorporated into a zoning bylaw directly, where certain zones provide developers with the option to build to base or bonus density. CACs are very similar in principle, but they are not explicitly legislated under the Local Government Act, even though they are very commonly implemented in communities across BC. As a result, CACs cannot be called fees, charges, or levies and can only be set as target rates that are not required. CACs are optional insofar that the rezoning itself is optional at the developer's discretion. So in short, density bonusing is conditional, where density is given provided contribution per the formula outlined in the zoning bylaw. And CACs are agreed upon contributions as part of the rezoning process. Next slide, please. So there's generally 4 ways to implement either a CAC or density bonusing into provisions. So the first is density bonusing directly into the zoning bylaw. Second is target fixed rate CACs at rezoning. Third is negotiated CACs based on land lift, which is roughly the approach Gibson has implemented today. And fourth is a hybrid approach. And we have proposed in the CAC policy a mix of 2 and 3. And over the next few slides, we'll walk you through how we arrived at this approach in the draft policy itself.
Great, thank you. Okay, so a little bit of a recap of where we've been and how we got here. So the first part of the work that we did, so which we're referring to as phase 1, this was focused on developing and presenting a review of CAC approaches and implementation frameworks that are in use elsewhere in BC. So we did a fairly thorough scan of communities across the Lower Mainland and on Vancouver Island, and we presented those findings in summary form in our first phase report. And that was accompanied in that report by a detailed appendix, which has a large comparative table showing CAC and density bonus frameworks as they're implemented in 25 different communities. In February of 2020, which feels like a really long time ago now, we held a real live in-person workshop in Gibsons, which was attended by some members of senior staff, CAO, and I believe there were 4 members of council there. So we ran that workshop over about 3 hours, and during that time we discussed CAC goals, possible policy approaches, implementation options, keys to success, and we walked through some of the case studies from other comparable communities. And one of the key takeaways after that workshop for our team was Gibson's desire for a policy that created something that was predictable, consistent, and fairly open, with a process that works well for both staff and for the development community. It's something that's a little more streamlined. And also, it was identified that there was a preference for amenities, for certain types of amenities to be funded through CACs. One of the ones that was of primary consideration at the time was allocation of funds for affordable housing construction. Following on that workshop in the spring of 2020, we conducted the outreach portion of our work, which was developer consultation. So this took the form of a series of surveys. We distributed surveys to, I believe it was 18 developers. And we then conducted one-on-one interviews with the subset of those that took the time to complete the survey. So those surveys and interviews were intended to both help us develop a knowledge base for subsequent financial analyses, but also to gauge the development community's general sentiment and perspective on the topic of CACs. The majority of those who responded and with whom we spoke indicated that they didn't anticipate that reasonable CAC target rates would be an impediment to development in the community. And then using the inputs from developers plus our own research, we prepared an initial sample set of financial analyses simply as a demonstration of the type of process we would be going through if and when we moved on to phase 2 to set rates. Next slide, please. There we go. So coming out of phase 1, the recommendations that came out of that process were that the preferred approach based on research and workshop feedback was a hybrid approach that would allow for transparency and consistency of process. There was a desire for a target rate CAC system that would be applicable to the majority of development sites and conditions. So the idea would be to limit the number of negotiated CAC processes that would be incurred. We talked a little bit about exemptions to CACs. So there were recommendations that not all forms or types of development would be subject to CACs. So some CAC exempt projects would be those related to nonprofit housing, rental housing, or developments with significant heritage conservation pieces. And for rate setting, we recommended that these be based on detailed sets of financial analyses that would allow us to determine what rates are appropriate based on how much developers might be able to afford to pay while still generating reasonable returns for their projects. We also noted that there would be, we would want to retain the ability to negotiate CACs under certain circumstances, such as more atypical projects, or if a developer simply elects to proceed with a negotiated approach through the provision of economic analysis. Next slide, please. So this then led to phase 2, and phase 2 work was undertaking the financial analysis work to actually set our rates and develop the CAC policy. So what we did here was we prepared a series of pro forma financial analyses to assess the financial performance of different rezoning and redevelopment scenarios to look at how much lift in land value could be generated by the change in use or the change in density or both on these case study sites. And then subsequently, what does that value change mean for the ability to generate a CAC payment? So in undertaking these analyses, we looked at a dozen case study sites across a swath of different neighborhoods around Gibsons. And we looked at scenarios where land would be rezoned to align with 3 OCP land use designations. So those would be the medium density residential designation, high density residential, and the low density residential 2, so the small lot single family. And then to supplement those case study analyses, we also prepared supplementary analyses that looked at a hypothetical parcel, a hypothetical 1 acre parcel, as though it were developed at either medium density or high density form, and as though that parcel were purchased by a developer at an average value based on the average of the case study sites that we had looked at. Next slide, please. Sorry, that slide, I believe, was the one I was just, oh, no, that's fine. Yeah, so then at the end, what we did is we prepared these analyses, and then based on those analyses, we set out our CAC rates based on a percentage of land value lift capture. So Sam, I'll turn it back over to you.
So in addition to the financial analysis, phase 2 also was the development of the CAC policy itself. And through the feedback we got in phase 1, the one goal that we had was to keep it simple. So we wanted to develop a clear and easy to interpret document that could be provided as a handout in a pre-application meeting or posted on the town's website for simple viewing. So the policy itself defines what CACs are, when they're applicable, who pays, how revenues are allocated, and incorporates target rates based on the financial analysis that Justin just walked you through. The policy outlines applicable credit for existing residential uses, which we'll explain in a moment here. When negotiated approaches are appropriate, it establishes applicable exemptions from CACs, sets out procedures and responsibilities, and when reviews of rates are applicable. Next slide, please. So we know that most of you have reviewed the draft policy in advance of today's meeting, but we thought we would just quickly run through what the different sections and provisions entail. So CACs are to apply to all new residential development that is seeking rezoning, with some exceptions, which we'll touch on in a couple moments. And CACs are payable to the applicant prior to council consideration of a zoning amendment. Next slide, please. You're muted, Justin.
Of course. Okay. We had to do that at least one time. Okay, so this is where we get into, well, what are the actual rates that we're setting? So coming back to what I was saying before, we did 12 case study financial analyses, and we performed subsequent analyses on hypothetical 1 acre parcels. And for each of these, we were looking at what is the base value, what is the value under the new higher density rezoning, what is the value that the developer could pay for the land based on that rezone value. So what is the difference between the base and the new land value? And then using that spread, what is an appropriate CAC payment? And we found that there was a wide spread in the amount of land lift that's generated across the case study sites, a little bit less of a spread with the hypotheticals. So at the end, what we were thinking is that the goal of the rates would be to try to set our rates not so high as to unduly burden or hinder development. So set the rates at a low enough point on the viability spectrum so that in the end you do not unduly impede development activity. So what you end up doing in this case is, in the end, while setting your rates on the lower end of the spectrum would theoretically leave money on the table in some cases, we think that this is a more appropriate approach to offset delays or potentially negation of otherwise good projects. Our recommended target CAC rates as a starting point are based on a 50% take of the average land lift that is generated through the rezonings in our financial analyses. Just by way of comparison, and you can look through the appendix in our phase 1 report if you'd like more details. We have seen community amenity contribution rates set at anywhere from 25 up to 75% of land lift. Some communities where CACs are done exclusively on a negotiated basis based on land lift analyses are taking anywhere from 50 to 75%. I know District of North Vancouver, I believe, currently has a target of 75% capture. City of Delta, I think, is at the other end of the spectrum at 25%. Our feeling is that as a first foray into target CAC rates, we think a combination of a slightly lower target rate and a 50%, or sorry, a lower percentage of or lower lift capture and a lower rate based on 50% lift is an appropriate place to start. The other piece of our philosophy in setting these rates was to try to keep this as simple as possible. So we decided not to proceed with variation between multifamily typologies, at least at this stage. So duplexes, townhomes, apartments, etc. All the multifamilies are clustered in one rate category. And again, this is something that can be revisited with additional layers added down the road if deemed appropriate. And we also deemed, we decided that at this stage to set single sets of rates for the town as a whole, rather than trying to vary the rates by area. So the rates were set, we've landed on for a starting point are at $10,000 per single family lot and $4,000 per multifamily dwelling unit. Next slide, please. So coming back to what Samantha was discussing on the idea of credits, we wanted, this was something that we discussed quite extensively with each other, and I believe also with Leslie Ann. One of the philosophies here is that we don't want to be paying for, or we don't want the developer to be paying for what they can already do as of right. So here's one quick example. If we can imagine a single family lot with a single family dwelling that is rezoned to allow for an apartment building of 20 units. So in this case, the single family dwelling would be credited $10,000. And then each new multifamily dwelling unit would pay $4,000 in CAC. So the net payable amount would come to 80 minus 10, so 70,000. Next slide, please. Back to you, Sam, I believe.
Back to me, yep. So we wanted to incorporate right into the policy when circumstances for negotiated CAC should remain and where CAC exemptions may be applicable. So for the negotiated approach, generally this applies to what we're calling atypical applications. So some examples would be when the proposed density exceeds what is currently permitted within the OCP, where a subdivision of more than 10 lots is being proposed, or just for very complex developments such as phase developments. CACs based on negotiation are also allowable at the applicant's desire if they wish to undertake their own economic assessment at their own cost. Where CAC exemptions apply is if the applicant is a not-for-profit organization for purpose-built rental housing to not disincentivize rental development, and council may, at its discretion, waive some or all of the CACs where affordable housing or public amenity is being provided in kind. Next slide, please. So the policy includes the allocation of CAC revenues currently in two separate reserved funds. So one is the Affordable Housing Fund and one is a general CAC fund. The allocations are still to be determined by council, which will be a simple percentage at council's discretion. And down the line, should council or staff wish to include another fund, say public art becomes a strong community priority, a separate fund can be set up. So this is flexible as well, that this was our recommended starting approach. Next slide, please. So updates to the policy, we recommend that the target rates be reviewed every 2 to 5 years. However, in the intervening periods, rates could be indexed at the Consumer Price Index annually. Council may amend the rates at its discretion. And we also recommended that when the town updates its zoning bylaw and or OCP, that presents an opportunity to incorporate density bonusing directly into the zones, again, if that feels appropriate at that time. We recommend that council and staff monitor how and when CACs are triggered and how they are being received in the community and how effective they are working. Next slide, please. That concludes our presentation, and we're open to any questions if anyone has any. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for your presentation. Very interesting. A complex issue, which is hard, I find, for the public to get their heads around when they're not familiar with dealing with these things every day and understanding it. I mean, there's a general question of, if you go back to your example of the single family house converting into what, 10 apartments?
Yeah, 20 in our example, but yes.
There's a certain feeling that the value of one or two of those apartments should actually become the amenity, so that if those apartments are valued at $100,000 each, that the community amenity should actually be maybe around $200,000, not $80,000. So
right.
And I don't know if any communities are actually practicing that type of community amenity.
And there are certainly many approaches, and the rates vary widely depending primarily on the economics of developing in different communities. So to your example, when we look at, if we were looking at a case study site of a single family home on a single family lot being demolished, rezoned, and then built to this new project, the way that we calculate the amenity is we say, okay, this is what the completed 20-unit apartment building would likely achieve in terms of sales revenue. And then from that, we back out all the costs to get it built, hard costs, soft costs, and then the cost of the, so all the costs, hard costs and soft costs, financing costs, developer profit requirement to get the financing. And then after that is how much is left to pay for the land. Yeah. And then you compare that to, well, what's the land, what has the developer actually had to pay for the land? And then there's a bit of a spread there.
And the DCCs,
the DCCs would be part of the soft costs of development, exactly. Fees and charges.
Which can itself be more significant than the community amenities.
In many cases, in most cases, in fact, yes.
That's correct, yeah. Okay. I'll turn it over to Councilor. I'm sure Councilor has many questions. What I would like to ask you before we finish here is what's your experience in public consultation on this kind of a bylaw, and what are your thoughts and is our next steps in terms of public consultation? Because I think that we give that opportunity out there. So, but maybe, I don't know if you've thought about that, if you've thought about it and have an answer. Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy to answer, and then I don't know if Sam or Leslie Ann also have something they'd like to say, but I think given that at this point, this is coming to you as a council policy. We're not doing this as part of a revision to the zoning bylaw or a revision to the OCP, at which point there's statutory requirement for public consultation. So at this point, we see this as more of a technical exercise to see what is feasible. And the consultation process that we went through as part of this was with those who it would impact, which would be the development community. My feeling is that the point where public consultation would be appropriate is at such time that the zoning bylaw or the OCP get opened up and this type of policy gets rolled into those documents. I don't know if either of you, Leslie Ann, or Sam, that.
No, I was just going to speak to what you said about if and when this does get incorporated into a zoning bylaw or OCP, that would definitely be a time to do a broader public consultation.
Yeah, and I'd agree with them. This is a policy that would be adopted by council. So at this point, it's a council decision to decide what's an appropriate rate and how you want to proceed with CAC contributions.
Okay. Have you done in terms of pro forma, basic full example of that, say that apartment you were describing? Did you do including DCCs on that?
Yes. Yeah, that was for each of the 12 case study sites. We ran through a full hypothetical pro forma based on current rates.
Yeah, I think there's a general assumption that there's huge profits to be made by developers from the start of a project.
Yeah.
As opposed to from simply increases in values that occur naturally in the environment.
Yeah.
We all get.
So the way we set up our pro formas is we allocate a certain fixed percentage of costs as the profit margin, which is generally it's one of the ways that a developer would look at a project, or a bank would look at a project when looking to finance it. So it's typically your target rate is somewhere in the 12 to 15% of project costs as a fixed profit margin. When you do your math, you look at your revenues minus your costs minus your profit, and out comes your land value. The dollar figure may well go up as your project increases in scale, but it will not change as a percentage of total cost within the framework of the way we run the pro forma. And to the comment of huge developer profits, and sure, it happens. Often it doesn't happen. Often these guys are taking big risks, so it's difficult. And I know that there is definitely that perception, and it may not be untrue in some cases, but we're reporting based on the numbers we've run. So,
thank you. Good. Councilors, comments, thoughts. Councilor Deandre.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like a clarification because I understand that community amenity contributions you can ask at the time of rezoning, and density bonusing is when it's not a rezoning, but when the developer wants to a little bit of more density and we negotiate. And then the density bonusing is supposed to be incorporated in the zoning bylaw. But I go to our zoning bylaw, I don't see anything. Am I missing something or?
No, sorry, maybe Leslie Ann can.
I don't understand this part very well. Can you?
Fair enough, fair enough.
Okay, thank you.
Leslie Ann, do you want to field this one?
Sure. So we do have density bonusing in our zoning bylaw. It would be embedded in the zone. So we have some CDA zones, for example, where it allows a base density. So say it allows development up to 3 units of residential, but then there would be requirements to add more density to that. And then the requirements could be, it depends on the zone, but the latest one that council approved was the mixed use gateway zone that we did in Upper Gibsons for the veterinary clinic and the Holy Crap building, you know what I'm talking about. So that had a base density of, I think, 3 residential units, and then it required a maximum density, which was the maximum FSR in the OCP. But to get to that higher density, a community amenity contribution is required based on a financial analysis. So we had the financial analysis embedded into that zone.
Oh, okay. So I think what I'm not clear, because the CACs will be pretty much, anyone can grab the document and understand. But how is the analysis done with, for example, with the density bonus? Is there a formula as well?
Justin, this is I would rely on you to talk about how the analysis is completed, but we would rely on a third party.
So I mean, the way you've described it for this particular zone that has density bonusing built into it, it sounds like the density bonus payment is based on a financial analysis. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So yes, so in this case, to access the density bonus within the framework of the zone that Leslie Ann has described, one would have to run a site-specific pro forma analysis to figure out what the financials of that higher density look like, compare it to the financials of the project under the base density, and see what that spread is. And then the negotiation would be how much of that spread is the density bonus payment. Now, if you were to put together a brand new zoning bylaw or a new zone, you could build a density bonusing ladder that said, here's your base density that you access as of right. To go up to density X is, just throw numbers out, $20 a square foot or $2,000 a year, whatever the metric is. And then to go up to density Y, it's another number. And oftentimes we've seen where you have a density bonus ladder built like this, you have it saying, here's your base. If you bonus up to the max as envisioned in the OCP, you pay X. If you want to bonus beyond the OCP and go through an OCP amendment, then you're also going to be paying an additional amount beyond. That type of ladder framework doesn't currently exist in the zoning bylaw, but it could at some point in the future.
Councilor Kroll.
Justin, with respect to what the analogy you were just giving, if you had a density ladder, and let's say, because you often see developers will include condominiums, and then they'll put in an affordable rental component.
Sure.
So this is allowing them to get the density up. They've got the density they want with the condominium sales, but the affordable rental
is part of the amenity.
Is exempt CACs. So it allows them to, is that interpretation that I'm seeing correct? What higher overall density, but they're not paying the CACs because they're capping what triggers the CACs at a certain level.
There are circumstances where the provision of affordable units, however affordable units are defined, would be considered in-kind contribution towards a CAC, and one can put a dollar value on the value of each of those affordable units. Generally, one way one would do that is to say, let's say you're building 20 units at the base and 40 units at the density bonus, and 10 of those units are at the affordable. You would figure out what's the value of that 10 unit contribution by looking at what would be the value of those 10 units if they were market units, and then figure out what is their value at the rental rates that they're being proposed at. And then you figure out, well, maybe the value is $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a unit in some cases.
And to clarify as well, the way the policy is currently written, CACs are exempt for purpose-built rental.
That's right.
Units, and council may at its discretion waive CACs if there's an affordable housing component incorporated into the development.
But your question is definitely a good one, and it is something that would need to be considered and analyzed if you were to try to build out a density bonusing framework within your zoning bylaw down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Councilor Ludwig.
Yeah, I think I'm a bit of an outlier on this whole topic. I've always struggled with the concept of applying community amenity contributions for affordable housing because, you know, the developers just add that cost to the build and the buyer eventually has to take that on. The developer doesn't. They don't build a project if they're not going to make their 12 or 15%. It just is, it's a no-go. So it's really just increasing the cost of home ownership. And so I struggle with the fact that there isn't an incentive in this policy to encourage entry-level home ownership construction versus high-end construction. It doesn't matter whether I'm building a townhouse for $500,000 on Park Road or somewhere like that versus 1.5 million down in the Bay. I'm still only paying $4,000. And so if I was a developer, I'd go high-end because at the end of the day, my costs are the same from a fees perspective. And just so folks know, there's a lot, like we were talking about the cost, the soft cost of development. Just to subdivide one lot, you're looking at close to $100,000 in fees in Gibsons, 80 to 100,000 when you pay DCCs, engineering fees, all sorts of costs that go, your permit fees or your subdivision application, you're looking at $80 to $100,000 just to divide one lot into two. So, you know, everyone hears, oh, it's only $4,000 or it's only $10,000. There's a lot more to it than that. And I agree with Justin that developers are taking huge risks when they do this. And so it's natural that they're going to go to the higher end of the scale because the profit is more guaranteed at that end. And I think that by doing that, we're discouraging homes being constructed in Gibsons at a price point that our residents here locally can afford. So I'm just saying I'm struggling with this a little bit.
I don't disagree with you. I you know, for example, and I brought it up while we're talking here, the assessed value of the land that my house is on, the land itself, which is a double lot. The assessed value is $711,000. If it weren't for the fact that there's already two titles, if it was one title and I had to subdivide that, the value after subdivision would be about $500,000 per lot, so $1 million, so $300,000. But the cost of getting there is, you know, another $100,000 plus the $50,000 the demolition of the house that's on there now. So suddenly, you know, any value increase there is it's not $500,000 or $300,000. It's probably around $100,000. And if the market has stayed stable in that time and has not gone down, or perhaps it's gone up, bonus for me. But yeah, and then it's $10,000 per house on the if I had to rezone. Do that, I'm not sure. So anyway, it is it's not as cut and dried that everybody's making huge amounts of money, and it doesn't apply to commercial unless it's got a residential component. and that sort of thing. Yeah. So, yeah, Councilor Deandre.
Thank you. Yeah, I struggle with the same, more or less with the same issue that Councilor Ludwig raised. And also, why is it not possible? Because obviously certain zones in town would be more conducive to a more low-key development, while, you know, anything close to the water, it will be more like a multi-million. So I don't see why this could not be incorporated into different zoning and have different prices. Another thing that I also don't see that is a big deal, it's the difference in terms of applying. When I look at all the options for other cities, there's a difference between townhouses and apartments in many cities, right? Mm-hmm. So why not apply as well this to Gibsons? What is, you know, it's simple. If it's an apartment, is one fee. If it's townhouses, it seems by through what I understood reading the anonymous policy and your document, that it always gives advantage to apartments and not to, sorry, to townhouses and not to apartment. So that's will be, and if I have a third comment, it regards the rental housing. What if the rental, it's a luxury rental? How do we control that too? Is it possible to put a specificity on the type of rental, such as purpose-built rental projects and mixed-use projects where 100% of the residential portion is rental and where the tenure is secured by legal agreement for at least 30 years, you know, something that, okay, because what happened is our town, it becomes also a kind of resort. So we're struggling with that too. So these three things. Thank you.
No, those are great points. Absolutely.
You have great answers.
Do I have great answers? I think with regards to the question on the rental tenure, yes, we can definitely, there's definitely an option to say, you know, you are exempt from CAC, provided that you are a rental project and you're, you know, it's secured in perpetuity or for a certain period of time. The idea of splitting out the rates between townhouses and apartments, absolutely, that can definitely be done. It is most commonly done. As we were going through this, we were debating as to how much we wanted to parse this out. And we ended up kind of veering towards the simpler is better end of the spectrum at this stage. We can certainly revisit it and add in an apartment rate that is separate from the townhouse rate. As for the variability in rates depending on neighborhood, this is again something we discussed extensively as we were going, and many larger communities do have rate variability by neighborhood simply because the economics of projects are so different. So even in our case study analyses, we found cases where, depending on what your end unit prices are, and because I guess let me take a step back here, the main moving variables that moved from scenario to scenario were how much you could sell your units for, and then the typology of the product, whether it was townhouse or apartment or single family, there was a slight change in the hard costs. And then the other piece was how the project deals with parking. And then there are obviously other costs and fees and charges that are set based on percentages of these costs. But the main thing is how much can you sell the units for in the end? And then you back out and see, well, what's the value proposition there? And in some cases, the value says maybe you can do $30,000 or $40,000 a unit. But then on the other end of the spectrum, there were cases where it's you could maybe do $1,000 or $2,000 a unit. So we said, if we are setting a single flat rate for the entire town as a starting point, our philosophy was set it low so that we don't kill those lower end projects, with the knowledge that by doing so, you are going to be leaving some money on the table for those higher projects. But the advantage is you have a flat rate and you're not pushing every project through a negotiated process based on land. So that comes back to some of the philosophy that we laid out in our first phase report, where the only way that you can maximize your dollar capture through CACs is site-by-site negotiation. But that creates all sorts of additional headaches for staff and for the developers. On the other side, it's set the rates low. Let's make sure that we don't we don't unduly burden these projects. And then there are other layers of complexity between those where you could set rates differently by neighborhood. So it's all a matter of where you want to start and how much complexity you want to build into the policy. In my mind.
Yeah, appreciate that. It's always going to be a challenge. One of the areas of Gibsons that is a clear demarcation in terms of value is, do you have a view or don't you have a view?
Yeah.
So
yep, that view is worth something for sure.
That view protection area that some of us live in, for example, is something that has a value. But then, of course, we have a tree protection bylaw as well. It says, yeah, you got a view, but you're not going to cut that tree down in the front yard or your neighbor's yard either. So that's where that's where the negotiation comes in.
That's right.
How good of you? Yeah, Councilor Deandre.
Thank you. I understand your points, obviously, but I feel like, I don't know, inequality, it's the thing that is skyrocketing in every single area. And I feel like, just sharing Councilor Ludwig's point, at the end of the day, we want the rich to pay for the poor a little bit, to share the load. So when we do a flat rate, it's almost like, okay, everybody has to pay, but the privilege don't really pay more for amenities, right? So I still believe we can do something fairly simple, but that we take into account, because I almost feel that it's not fair for the ones in more need. Another, I would like also to mention in terms of, I know at the time when we had the consultation, we emphasized a lot of the issues of affordable housing. But I also want to emphasize that there are other needs in the community as well. And hopefully the federal government and provincial government will put more money towards affordable housing. So I think a community consultation will be also relevant to ask our community what kind of amenities they would like, and even ranking these amenities. So staff doesn't have to think twice, right? We know what the priorities are. And so if this could be also incorporated, would be very valuable.
I think one thing we have to remember is that this is triggered by rezoning, not by development. If
that's right,
we're building the 8-story apartment building within a zone for 8-story apartment building, there is no community amenity to be paid. And some people feel quite offended by that. They said, well, he's building, he is building, but he's building within the zone. Now, if he comes back and asks for more, or asks for a different zone, or asks to change currently a residential zone, single family, into a multifamily, that's where the community amenity kicks in. And it's one thing, it's not every development, it's not commercial development, simple commercial development. So it's, when it comes down to the numbers of development, Leslie Ann, what would you say in terms of relative percentage of development that we get in town here that would be where we'd see community amenity kick in terms of the percentage that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis?
Like number of rezoning applications, kind of like
we don't
percentage of that.
Huge rezoning versus development applications.
Yeah, we probably get 2 to 4 rezoning applications a year. This year we've got 2 active ones and 2 more coming in. So it would be nice to have some kind of clear policy to let them know in advance.
Pretty quick, yeah.
Yeah, it does help to have clarity in the negotiation and target rates for sure.
Right, yeah. But the fact is, it's not every development, it's not every project, it's not every house.
No.
Councilor Ludwig?
I just wanted to come back to this whole concept you mentioned earlier, Mayor Beamish, about the view protection zone. And the more I think about it, the more I think this is where the rub is for me. The price difference, the sale price difference is so different in the view area versus the non-view area that I really do feel that we need to examine that. And maybe make it even cheaper for the areas that don't have the view and make it higher over there where they do, because it is significant.
Yeah. Then, yeah. And then it becomes the number of view units within that building sort of thing, as opposed to the ones at the back side, as opposed to the ones at the front side. So they get some of those differentials. But so how do we proceed forward, Council? And a couple of questions were asked. One is that in terms of the percentages, how would we assign those percentages in terms of going forward? And do we want to take a look at the target rates? Is there ability to either have another target rate, or is there a ability to say that a 10% premium will be added to properties within the view protection area? As simple as that. So that those are things we could look at. Councillor, I'm going to go to Councillor Kroll first, and Councillor Ludwig.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. You know, I certainly agree with the feeling that there are certain areas of this town where, you know, there's going to be a huge difference in sale price, you know, versus Upper Gibsons versus a view corridor. And, you know, I'm assuming it would be a relatively simple process just to add another line in view corridor areas where, you know, potential sales are higher, that you're paying a premium fee. I sort of like the idea that, you know, we wheel it out and it's tried, and then at the point where we're looking at the OCP, you know, we've got a bit of a track record to see how this is impacted on development and sales, and we say, hey, it's working great, you know, with a couple of little tweaks, you know, let's move on. With respect to what we have, the council identifies portion of revenue and what percentages, I think, you know, the crisis thing in this community at the moment is funding towards affordable housing. So, you know, my recommendation would be like you know, at the moment, I don't know if we have a set rate now, but, you know, of a project, what percent goes to affordable housing, but I'd certainly say something like a 70-30 split.
Mm-hmm.
And 70 towards affordable housing. But I think, you know, having the opportunity to see how this works, how it impacts, with the caveat on it that for view areas that they do pay a premium, and, you know, try and keep it as simple as possible initially. And as we see how it evolves, it can be tweaked because it's not embedded in a bylaw yet. So it's fairly easy to adjust. Once it's in a bylaw or the OCP, then we're tearing our hair out every time we have to deal with it.
Councillor Ludwig, did I see your hand up?
I'd like to see us ask less in areas without a view, more in areas with a view. And I'd like to put, I would like to have at least just one community consultation meeting on this and talk to the community, give them an, I mean, I understand what people are saying, that, you know, that we should consult when this gets incorporated into our rezoning or OCP, but we know this is important to a lot of people in this community, even if they are not directly impacted by it, i.e. they're not a developer. It's a topic that we discuss a lot in this community. I think I would like to see some edits made from our discussion today, come up with another revised version, and hold a community consultation meeting on it.
Okay.
Councillor Kroll.
Certainly further to what Councillor Ludwig was saying, I think a portion of it is also a bit of a community awareness into what triggers the community amenity charge. You know, and I think there is a little angst in the community that opportunities have been lost. And, you know, sadly, you know, on some of these projects, you know, the trains left the station. So now we're, you know, it's new projects going forward. And, you know, I don't think, unless someone does some huge parcelings of land, we're going to see the scale of projects that would have triggered these fees. On some of the smaller things, you know, I think a lot of developers are going to look at how to maximize profit, how they can squeak in under the wire. So,
It
you know, I think the education component is important.
surprised me at our last meeting. We considered a proposal for a duplex with 2 suites on a lot in Lower Gibsons that would not have triggered community amenity contributions because it was not a rezoning. It was just a duplex, 2 suites. So suddenly 4 units built on what is currently a single family house property that suddenly that we can't turn around and say, hey, look what you're gaining here, and 2 suites that would likely become short-term rentals, which means it's almost becomes a commercial business. We don't have the ability in a project like that to look for any additional contribution to the community. And the other thing that comes into play, and I think we don't do the development community much service when we don't recognize their contributions in a significant way. You know, for example, I mean, how many people know that Eagle Crest contributed to Armour's Beach? There's no recognition at Armour's Beach as to how that was done and that contribution. There's no recognition for Dave Longman for the sidewalk that was done up in Park Road in front of the church. That was a offsite, 3 blocks, not 3 blocks, but significant distance from his development site. So those are things that also people looking at development don't know and don't understand occur. So that we need to look at how we better recognize the contribution of developers as they develop. So, Councilor Deandre, you want to? You're muted, Councilor Deandre.
I would like to see a differentiation between the apartment and townhouse, because my understanding is, I think it's fair. And and the other issue is just the example that Mayor, you gave about the project last time. If we had approved, we would have approved extra density. So would council would have a mechanism to ask for density bonus in this case for the density, the project with the extra.
It was a duplex. It's a duplex zone lot, so they were already.
Yeah, because the floor, it was double floor ratio. So I'm assuming that we would have a mechanism to ask for density bonusing.
No. Not you can't ask for density bonusing in a variance application. So what they had done is they were applying for a variance to increase the floor area, but they were within the density of the zone. So the density bonusing is adding more units, and they were building to what was allowed in their zone. So this would only get triggered when you're rezoning to add density or change the use and add density.
So it's kind of a catch-22. There's a lot of things that people can do on a property that would not trigger this, and then that's fair. That's fine. We want that as well because that happens. But at the same time, it almost seems to be somewhat out of balance. I agree with your thoughts on apartments versus townhouses, and I think that would be a useful change to make. And I also agree with the idea of the view protection area. It could be an easy one to define in terms of the property values in there or something. But remembering that not all properties with view are in a view protection area. Interestingly enough, So, Councillor Crowell.
I think I sort of answered the view protection would be at the time of building. Because
we actually have a zone. We have a zone for view protection area zone. So if you live within that zone, you're in the view protection area. But
case in point, the Marine Drive duplex. It's across the street currently from a vacant lot. Right. So where they have a view right now, someone could build within the limits on that view protected lot, and the lower units would completely lose their view within the allowed, so it's sort of view protection at the time of building.
Does council want to have a look at the recommendations on page 39 and tackle the percentages, or leave that up to our public consultation? Councilor Crowell suggested 70-30, I think. I was 80-20 in my mind, but or do we want to leave that as part of the consultation process? Councilor Deandre?
I wonder, just to speed up the process. I mean, if we can do this consultation fairly quick, I would prefer hearing, but if we can't, we can choose a rate and then we can hear from them, and then it's always easy to amend. So
That's
right. Yeah, whatever works.
Yeah.
And I would like also, if it's possible, to ask like what kind of community amenities as well, right? Because not everybody, I think I'm hoping that the governments would kick in more with affordable housing, right? So perhaps our need to finance affordable housing project would decrease. But when the community grows, actually put by you guys, we need amenities need to grow with compared to the number of residents. So it's important not to have this ratio, like, right, we grow too much and then amenities are not growing on the same ratio. So.
Yeah, and then we're only talking about the community amenity contribution here, not the density contribution. So I don't think it hurts if we go to public consultation to actually put a bit of a list of examples of the kinds of things, and then a line for other underneath that for things that weren't thought of, and then ask people to put in, okay, taking this $100, where would you apply that money in terms of percentage, and see how that how people felt about different things. It will be all over the map, but that being said, some of it can be moved at the end of saying, okay, these are categories of things, so it could be moved in as opposed to specifics, like public art. In our recent policy, we looked at public art and said potentially 2.5% of community amenity contributions, but that would be possibly in that second fund there, the community amenity reserve fund, that would go there. So okay, I think we do need to go director planning to some kind of a public process. It should be done quick. I don't want to be caught off guard by a rush of rezonings coming in to defeat our objectives here. Samantha and Justin, do you have enough to kind of take another look at the idea of including townhouses separate from apartments, and the concept of view protection? You might want to get the view protection bylaw and take a look at that, but or just saying view houses, properties within the view protection area zone.
I think so. I think what we would do as a first cut is go back and look at our case study financials again and see, how much of a difference there was between the apartment and townhouse scenarios. And if we need to do a couple more analyses, we will. And in terms of the view ones, it'll be good to overlay that view protection area with our case study sites to see what pops out from that. There may be something very obvious.
And then, as Councilor Ludwig says, perhaps reducing the community amenity costs
in other areas,
other kinds of projects, how that could be looked at, and maybe to evaluate.
That's something we can look at.
Councilor Ludwig?
Yeah, with the lens in mind of trying to incentivize people to build entry-level housing more so than high-end housing. So kind of keep that lens in mind when you're thinking about it.
And that could possibly be a statement in terms of the purpose of the project, the policy as well. Maybe something to a nod to that in the policy, that our overall objective is to build a range of housing that meets the needs of everybody in our community, from high end to low end. So Now, that being said, are we tasking you with something that can be done within a reasonable time frame?
I believe so.
I think so.
Director of Planning, are you comfortable with the direction we're doing?
Yeah, I'll have to regroup with Justin and Samantha and work around this. Yeah, and I'm just looking at our view protection area. It excludes view properties like Gospel Rock and Eagle View, for example. So applying the view protection area might not be the right approach. So we'll have to figure out how to work around what the intention of this conversation is, which is to apply a premium to properties that have views, basically.
Yeah, I don't know if BC Assessment can help with that, whether that's part of their assessments process. So again, not a rush, but I think that I'd hate to be caught off guard by the next application that says that. Appreciate that. I appreciate all your work. It's a complicated issue, and more so by a small town experiencing a lot of challenges in terms of development. So that and a lot of interest. I mean, this is there's a lot of interest in this particular project, and we want to try to get it right, but recognizing at the same time it's not a bylaw. It's a policy that could be changed at the next meeting.
That's right. And it's a first. It's almost a toe in the water that it's an informed test.
That's right. Yeah, and I really appreciate that. So, anything further, Council, rather than work on the percentages today or anything? I think that if Director Planner, if you're comfortable with our simply receiving this and having this come back, hopefully before we break for summer. So I'm hoping that we have another meeting in the middle of June, and we have a meeting at the beginning of July. Councilor Deandre?
Oh, it's just a clause on the market units, right? Just to ensure that, luxury market rentals, they don't fall into this category.
Well,
may I ask Councilor, this committee to pass prepare a motion to provide some direction around this? So what I'm hearing is adding a premium to view properties and differentiating between townhouses and apartments and different uses. And then I also heard that you want to do some community consultation.
Yes, we'd like to give an opportunity to consultation, but that's primarily how we would allocate the community amenity contributions. Primarily.
Oh, okay. So that can come later once council has decided what the policy, generally what the policy is going to say.
We could put it out there in a general sense of the policy, but I think that the real thing we want to hear back is how do we allocate this funds? Councilor Ludwig?
I just wanted to emphasize again, just so it's not lost, that it's not just a premium on view properties, but also incentive in less high-end areas if possible. So maybe there'd be a 3-tiered, possibly, I don't know, but encouraging people to build entry-level townhouses or apartments for sale. So it's not just rentals, it's people need to enter into the home ownership market on the housing spectrum as well, and they need entry-level housing built, and so an incentive there. So incentive for lower end, premium for high.
Yeah. So that might take your $10,000 down in one sense, and for some, and then up to 12 or 14 or 15,000 for others. Yeah. Councilor Kroll.
Were staff looking for in what format this public consultation be done? Is it a survey online or?
That's up to you. What are you hoping to get out of this public consultation? So what do you want from the community in order to help you make a decision on the policy? Once we get that, then we can frame the consultation around that.
Well, I know we had some correspondence with respect to this issue. I don't know whether, a survey which perhaps Samantha and Justin could, put in some appropriate, develop a questionnaire that, gave a good sort of feedback. I know when we did a couple of these other ones, we got a lot of, we not necessarily got the information we were hoping to get from it. So, or do we do an actual public hearing on Zoom? But then we're criticized then for people not having access to Zoom and so on and so forth. So
I think given the time frame that we are involved with, we're still going to be under COVID restrictions. We're not going to be meeting in group. I think it would be a combination of perhaps a survey opportunity, but also a dialogue type meeting we have the budget with a presentation. I think it's a difficult one for people to grasp in some sense. And I think we need to have that conversation around what are community amenities and how they can be parsed. And I don't know if there are mechanisms to do a kind of a vote online when you're going through a process and say, give us your numbers. And at the end of this presentation, we're going to ask you to give us your suggestion for how the community amenities should be parsed out. And I don't know if that would be done, or we send a postcard out to home. Trouble with the postcard is it arrives in somebody's box. They don't know what community amenities are. It's a tough one to get their heads around. Councilor Deandre?
I wonder if it's possible, if you recall, Mayor, when we had the budget, right? We had a conversation with the community. It was really well received. People felt satisfied to be able to have a conversation. We can have in this regard some key points, the ones that we raised here and the ones that were raised on the email. And from this meeting, which is pretty much an invitation, we can follow up with a survey through the community, and people would be able to understand. I think it's a kind of an educational campaign that we have to do anyways, right? If you want public engagement, we need people to understand, and that will be interest, right? And so
yeah, I think that model you're mentioning, that's what I have in my mind too. So Councilor Crowell?
The reason for my comment was just to give staff the direction rather than them come back with something, well, that's not what we wanted. Just the opportunity now to tell them, we want to do a, Zoom meeting with get Samantha and Justin back and do a dog and pony show and do breakout rooms and give people an opportunity to discuss it as we did with the budget. And then, whatever, just so, I just don't want staff wasting their time and then us coming back and saying, hey, that's not what we asked for. So, if we want it done in a timely manner, we should give them the direction up front.
Anne?
Yeah, so I thank you for that, Councillor Crowell. I am looking for some direction on what information you're wanting to get from the public on this. Like I've heard you want to know what amenities the community would like. Are you looking for direction on how to break up the contributions received? Yep. Are you looking for direction on the percentage you'd like to take? Is it a 50% lift? Is it a 75% lift? Those are the decisions that council will need to make. So, or what percentage should go into the affordable housing contribution fund versus the amenity fund? Are those the decisions you're looking for input on? Because we can tailor the information around that, or we could do an information meeting, which is pushing out information about what the policy says and what's being proposed. So that's what I'm looking for.
Councilor Ludwig?
All of the above.
Okay.
So that sounded great, Leslie Ann. And so a little bit of a push out. So it is a little bit of an educational session, but at the same time, seeking feedback on here's the percentage that we're thinking of. Do you think this sounds appropriate based on while at the same time educating them as to how we came to those percentages in the first place. Talk to them a little bit about this conversation we've had today about actually having the community perhaps zoned out a little bit, where fees are a bit higher based on view and not, and the rationale behind our thinking that we're trying to encourage different housing types in different areas so that there's housing built for all needs. Yeah, so a little bit of it, use it as an educational opportunity, but at the same time, it's what do you call it, the pulse check or whatever, to see if we're on the right track with the community and see what kind of reaction we get.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think as far as the breakdown should be, I think in-house we should be able to handle the public the public process. And if Samantha and Justin, you can interpret what we said relative to the changes and that how the structure lays out, that would be very helpful for us. So and then get that back to Leslie Ann, and then we would go forward with a meeting. And I think it's a matter of just making sure that for some reason we received a number of correspondence on this, thinking that we don't care about public consultation, not knowing that we do care about public consultation. So our intention was always to have some kind of a conversation around this, so that's what we need to have with the community. So Councilor Leslie Ann, then Councilor Kroll.
Okay, so thank you, Mayor. I think what the process would be then is I'll regroup with Justin and Samantha after this, and we'll discuss the new policy and bring back an updated policy for your consideration with a proposed consultation plan. And then once you approve that, then we can go and do some consultation on that. And
I guess time-wise,
pushing us, we could aim for a first meeting in July. We've got July, and we've got 2 meetings left after June. So
if we were actually able to even set a consultation date at the next meeting and said, okay, let's do this and have, even though we don't have everything in place, we set the consultation meeting after that first meeting in July, and then so we have something back for the second meeting that we can actually consider and adopt, so that we can go off and not read the newspaper about the next development that was proposed while we were on holidays. Yeah.
mm-hmm.
Okay. Councilor Kroll.
If it were possible in the interim, if it would be, we could put out sort of a community amenity contribution overview, Reader's Digest condensed version that Elizabeth could perhaps put on our social media, just to say, this is coming up on, and it's going to be part of a community consultation, just, so people are aware off the top that, that it really is put out there that we are trying to do this, and, it is coming, and, so people don't, miss it, because all of a sudden we're moving on it and people can't catch up. So if it were possible, once we have it envisioned, that a brief overview of what triggers these rates, and here's your opportunity to participate. And if we do have a date when it's going to come up, then that can be embedded in the communication.
Okay.
Councilor Deandre, last word.
Yeah, it's just to incorporate my concern with rental housing. I didn't hear the planner, like on your notes. It's just to specify, right, what rental housing, not every rental housing, but a housing that is really committed to market price and things like that. I'm just wondering if there's a building, it's rental, but it's like on the view, well, maybe we will, but I think we're talking about affordability. So if you're gonna exempt like a rental building, we want to ensure that is a building that's not catering to luxury rent or something like that. That's my if we're gonna exempt someone of paying for
market rental as opposed to
yeah, as opposed to higher end, right? Because we are in this the town of Gibsons is this kind of high end, as well community. We are a tourist place, so obviously that will be a trend. So I just don't want to be caught up And it's just to define what we want the rental housing to be exempt in this case.
And of course, we should have said all this back in 2020 when we were talking, but it's okay. We've had more time to think about it. So, and the longer it's out there, the longer we have to think about it. So I want to thank you both for everything you've done, and Director Planning as well for you and your work and your with urban systems. We're going to see this shortly. We're going to resolve this shortly, and we're looking forward to doing that for the community. So thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Back. So thank you. Okay, we're at that point in our agenda now where, and if you want to stick around, you might hear some questions about this, where we go to our inquiries and corporate officer, and we invite anybody to come in for inquiry.
Yes, if anyone's interested in asking a question, please raise your hand. I see no hands raised, Mayor Beamish.
Okay, well, that's great. We must have answered all the questions and addressed all the concerns. So thank you all very much. I'll next meeting of the regular committee of the whole will be June 15th at 3 p.m.
Oh,
And
thought there was a raised hand here. No, no.
And so we'll go forward. We'll see council again at 7 o'clock. And thank you all very much. Can I have a motion to adjourn, please? Councillor Kroll, Councillor Ludwig, all in favor of adjournment? Thank you. And I'm informed that Councillor
Lumley.
will not be joining us tonight. Okay. Thank you. Okay, take care, everybody. See you later. Thanks, staff.